the ethics of it all. Where do the boundaries of our ethics and our own limitations on our use of it, and I guess to what degree do ethics get in the way of advancement of the research? And I guess it's the question is also the inverse of that. So in an environment where those ethics were less of a concern, is there a chance of greater advancement in the research?
Yeah. So the major ethical issue is basically, I'll say, creating designer babies, changing the genome of an individual that would basically be inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's not only affecting that individual, but it will affect all their offspring or children.
Yeah.
And again, it's that aspect of, okay, are we playing God? Do we want to change this? Especially because we don't always know all the implications.
Mm-hmm.
I guess in China a few years ago, John Quay, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, tried to basically mutate this gene CCR5 that is a receptor for the infection of the AIDS virus, HIV.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some evidence that that people with a certain mutation in it were resistant to the virus. And so the idea was, okay, to create that for these two children. A couple of issues. When he made this mutation, it doesn't make exactly what you want. It will make a mutation, but it wasn't the exact same mutation. Would that new mutation confer resistance or not? Unknown. This gene normally has a function in cells. That's why most of us are not mutated in it. What's its normal function? Could you be hindering these children and making them maybe more susceptible to immune deficiency or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another big issue with making changes that are permanent.
It sounds like he made those changes without answers to some fundamental questions that existed around whether or not he should have. And I think, so I recall that story, and I think that might have been my first exposure, because there was some news media coverage when that occurred, and it's like, hey, Chinese scientists, create some mutation using CRISPR, and my question was, what in the world is CRISPR? Like, how can you just do that? And I think for a lot of folks, that was their first exposure to it, which is unfortunate because in a lot of ways that was a negative exposure to it. In other words, it wasn't, we just solved Alzheimer's, or we just solved, nerve growth, or it wasn't something like that. It was, should we have been doing this? It was an advancement, or if you want to call it that, it was an experiment that involved the outer boundaries of CRISPR ethics, as I think one way to put it. As you talk to people about your research and the fact that you're using CRISPR, do you find that there's a positive or a negative response, or mostly neutral?
I found mostly curiosity, honestly,
Yeah.
in what CRISPR is.
Yeah.
And I know there was a huge negative backlash among the scientific community about that, but as far as the lay non-scientific community, I don't know if
Maybe they didn't really understand those questions
the
that you just
severity.
referred to. Yeah, like why that was possibly in a gray area of ethics.
And specifically in the United States, CRISPR or genomic babies or anything with the genome's considered a drug under the FDA.
Okay.
So it's illegal to edit or distribute drugs without FDA approval. And the FDA hasn't approved genome editing. So you can't, at least in the United States, do any type of genome editing on humans. You can get grants to do them on non-human mammals or lower invertebrates, but you usually have to submit, grant approvals for the non-human mammalian animals.
Yeah. Although there are some clinical trials going forth trying to use CRISPR not to make babies, but on adults. There's one clinical trial going on trying to correct basically a gene that's mutated that causes blindness. and to try to correct that gene. And so again, here they're going to put the CRISPR into the eye, not into the whole person. So it's a very limited trial. And again, obviously, they've submitted this to FDA. There's approval to go on and at least try this.
So with any technological advancement that requires a robust ethics around, like nuclear, nuclear proliferation, for instance, are you concerned at all about CRISPR proliferation? Is there any concern about, as our understanding of CRISPR advances, as it becomes accessible in other areas, like outside of systems where they have legal limitations on its use, or even within those systems with people who just don't care about legal boundaries? What are some of the concerns, or are there concerns about its more widespread use in research?
Yes, there are definitely concerns. And I think the situation with the Chinese scientists basically exploded those concerns, because here was somebody who was doing this research before I don't think scientists really even thought we knew enough about it, pushing the boundaries of ethics, getting around their own government controls, sort of doing it on his own. And the fact that the technology is readily available is a concern, because it's not hard to do it. It's just, are you doing it well enough? Are you doing it with enough understanding? And and then the whole ethical issue of, should you be changing a person completely? So
you mentioned, its use in changing adults. So not just at the embryo level, but, full-grown adults. Also implicit in the idea of a full-grown human is the idea of capacity and the ability to make decisions. Is there as much ethical constraint outside of the FDA requirements, but let's just talk purely ethics and not legality. In your mind, what are the ethics around an adult who may understand the risks? And you mentioned the 1% error or whatever the error may be. What in your mind are some of the ethics around a fully formed adult with capacity making those types of decisions?
Obviously, you've hit on the major thing: consent. And consent with knowledge. In other words, does the potential patient understand, at least in principle, what's going on, what the potential risks are, that any scientist or doctor working with them would be able to explain the risks, being able to have the person decide whether or not they want to participate in this trial? Because, it's not completely risk-free, and there's also the whole issue of, will it even work? It should work. Are we going to be able to get that correction done properly? It doesn't happen in every cell. It's not automatic. It will happen most of the time, but...
How far are we from the day when you can just walk into your local clinic and say, I want blue eyes, or I want blonde hair, whatever you may want? Like, how far are we from that?
I would say we're still a ways away. And again, it comes down to, obviously, will the local clinic ethically want to do that? But more importantly, do we understand what would cause blue eyes or brown hair or something like that? And then even doing it's a complicated procedure of trying to edit the genome of essentially a fertilized egg. And so it'd be in vitro fertilization, taking those eggs, trying to do CRISPR mutation on them. And then one of the questions, okay, first of all, if you want to change a gene, we all have two copies of our genes, one from the mother, one from the father. You'd have to edit both of them, which isn't always obvious and easy to do. And then you'd have to determine, okay, which one of these have a gene change in them? And you'd probably want to do that before the child grows up, because then it's sort of pointless. But obviously, if you have a fertilized egg and you take all the DNA out of it, you don't have a fertilized egg anymore.
Interesting.